She was never my equal. She was just convenient. Daniel Carter said it into the microphone, loudly, deliberately, with his new wife on his arm and a room full of Manhattan's most powerful people hanging on every word. Then he looked directly at Emma, his ex-wife standing 20 feet away in a simple black dress, and he smiled. Not an accidental smile, a constructed one, built specifically to land like a fist. The room rippled with uncomfortable laughter. Emma's hands stayed completely still at her sides. And in the far corner of that ballroom, Alexander Blackwood, the wealthiest man in the room, slowly set down his glass and turned to look at her. If this story speaks to you, please subscribe to our channel, hit the notification bell, and follow Emma's journey all the way to the end. And drop a comment telling us what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story has traveled. The night Daniel Carter decided to humiliate his ex-wife in public, he wore a navy blue suit that cost more than most people's monthly rent. And he did it with the easy confidence of a man who had never once been held accountable for anything he had ever done. It was a Tuesday evening in early October. The kind of night in Manhattan where the air smells faintly of rain and ambition, and the hotels along Park Avenue blaze with light from parties that most people will never be invited to. The Meridian Grand's ballroom had been booked for 3 months in advance, a private celebration for the closing of a major real estate deal, the kind of gathering where the guest list was worth more than most small countries. Emma Whitmore had been invited by her former colleague Patricia Huang, who now ran a boutique consulting firm, and had insisted Emma come. "You've been hiding long enough," Patricia had said on the phone 2 weeks earlier. "You need to show your face. You need people to remember who you are." Emma had almost said no. She had said no to a lot of things in the past 18 months. No to dinner invitations. No to networking events. No to the quiet, well-meaning attempts by old friends to pull her back into the social circles she had once moved through effortlessly. After the divorce, after everything Daniel had done and taken and twisted into something unrecognizable, Emma had retreated into a kind of deliberate smallness. A one-bedroom apartment in Hoboken, a part-time consulting role that paid just enough. A routine built around early mornings and long walks, and the slow, unglamorous work of putting herself back together one day at a time. But Patricia had been persistent. And somewhere beneath all the quiet and the caution, Emma had felt something stirring, a low, steady pulse of something she could not yet name. Not anger, not hope exactly. Something older than both of those. Something that had been waiting. So she had said yes. She wore a simple black dress, not expensive, not dramatic, just clean and well-fitted and hers. She did her own makeup. She took the PATH train into the city and walked the last 6 blocks because the October air felt good on her face. She told herself she was just going to show up, have one drink, say hello to Patricia, and go home. She did not expect Daniel to be there. She should have. She had known for months in the abstract way that people know things they are not ready to fully face, that Daniel's world, and her world, still had edges that occasionally touched. New York was large, but the circles inside it were small. The people who had been their mutual friends, their colleagues, their social orbit, they had not disappeared. They had simply realigned, most of them drifting toward Daniel, because Daniel was the one who still had money and power and a compelling story about himself. The story he told about himself. Emma had heard through various channels had changed somewhat since the divorce. In this version, Daniel Carter was a self-made man, a visionary, someone who had climbed from modest beginnings through sheer determination and brilliance. The part where his first wife had used her family's financial connections and her own considerable intelligence to help him build that first company from the ground up, that part had been quietly edited out of the narrative. Not denied exactly, just omitted. The way you might leave a person out of a photograph by simply stepping them out of the frame before you take the shot. Emma had known this. She had accepted it in the way you sometimes have to accept things that are unfair and wrong and painful, simply because fighting them requires a kind of energy you do not currently have. She had signed the papers. She had walked away. She had let Daniel keep the story, because she had told herself the story did not matter. What she had not prepared for was seeing him in person. She came through the main entrance of the ballroom just after 8 o'clock, and the first thing she heard was his laugh. Daniel had a particular laugh, full-throated, and a little too loud, the kind of laugh designed to carry across a room and signal to everyone within earshot that the person laughing was someone worth listening to. She had once found it charming. Now it moved through her chest like a cold hand pressing down. She almost turned around. She actually stopped walking for a moment. One foot still half raised her body, making the decision before her mind had fully caught up. But Patricia appeared at her elbow, small, quick, wearing a red blazer and a look of determined cheerfulness, and said, "You're here. Good. Don't you dare leave." "He's here," Emma said quietly. "I know," Patricia said, "and so are you." That was all she said. But there was something in the way she said it, matter of fact, no apology, no drama, that settled something in Emma's chest. She took a breath. She reached out and took a glass of sparkling water from a passing server, and she walked into the room. She did not immediately go near him. She talked to Patricia. She spoke to an old colleague from the finance world who greeted her warmly and asked what she had been up to. She moved through the room at an easy pace, not rushing, not hiding, just being present in the careful way she had learned to be present, noticing everything, reacting to nothing, keeping her face arranged in an expression of calm that she wore like armor. She was talking to Patricia near the far end of the bar when she heard his voice cut through the ambient noise of the room. "Well, I'll be damned. Emma." She turned. Daniel was maybe 15 feet away, moving toward her. He was not alone. Beside him was a woman Emma recognized from the photographs she had inevitably and involuntarily seen: Olivia Hartwell, 29 years old, daughter of Charles Hartwell of Hartwell Capital. The kind of woman whose presence at a party like this was itself a statement. She was stunning in a deliberate public way, and she held Daniel's arm with the comfortable ease of someone who had recently acquired something expensive and was still slightly amazed it belonged to her. Daniel looked exactly the way he always looked when he was about to do something he believed he could get away with. There was a certain looseness about him, the champagne probably, but also the confidence of a man who had been winning for long enough that he had stopped imagining other outcomes. "Emma Whitmore," he said, stopping in front of her. Around them, conversation had not stopped, not yet, but several people nearby had shifted their attention, the way people always do when they sense that something interesting is about to happen. "Daniel," she said. "Just his name, nothing else. I didn't know you were going to be here." He said it pleasantly, as though they were old acquaintances running into each other at a farmer's market, as though 12 years and a brutal divorce, and everything that had happened between them, were a mildly interesting footnote. "Patricia invited me," Emma said. "Of course she did." He smiled. Then he turned slightly to gesture at Olivia. "You remember Olivia?" Emma looked at Olivia. Olivia looked back with the careful neutrality of a woman who had been coached or had coached herself, who had understood going into this situation that there was a predecessor and had decided the best strategy was simply to be prettier and younger and more present. "Olivia," Emma said, and nodded. "Emma," Olivia said. There was a pause that lasted maybe 2 seconds and felt considerably longer. "You look well," Daniel said to Emma, in a tone that somehow managed to convey the opposite, that she looked fine, acceptable, adequately put together for someone who had been very publicly set aside. "Thank you," Emma said. "Working on anything interesting?" The question was conversational, effortless, the kind of question you ask someone you feel comfortably superior to, because it allows them to reveal how little they are doing while you stand there with everything you have accumulated. Emma had heard that question from Daniel many times over the last 18 months, relayed through mutual acquaintances who reported back his inquiries with varying degrees of tact. He wanted to know she had always understood, not because he cared about her answer, but because her diminishment was confirming and pleasurable to him. "A few things," she said. "Good, good." He nodded as though she had said something entirely expected. Then he turned slightly to address someone who had materialized near his elbow, a man Emma vaguely recognized as a real estate developer who had been at several of Daniel's dinners years ago, and said, "Michael, you know my ex-wife Emma. She's been trying to get back on her feet after well." He shrugged, smiled, let the sentence end where it ended. "She'll figure it out. She was always resourceful." The words landed in the air between them like something thrown. Emma felt the impact of it move through her body in a specific way. Not heat, not quite rage, but something precise and clarifying the way cold water feels when you have been too warm for too long. She was aware of Michael's slightly uncomfortable smile. She was aware of Olivia examining her champagne glass with sudden intense interest. She was aware of Patricia beside her perfectly still, and she knew without looking that Patricia's jaw was tight. Emma looked at Daniel. She thought about 12 years. She thought about the early days when they had sat at their kitchen table in a rented apartment in Brooklyn with spreadsheets and projections, and a dream that had been in large part built on ideas she had contributed and money her family had provided. She thought about the nights she had stayed up working on financial models, while Daniel entertained clients learning the deal side, becoming someone whose name people recognized. She thought about the slow erosion of being told over and over, and in ways both direct and indirect, that her contributions were secondary, supportive background, that the real story was his story, and she was just a part of the scenery. She thought about the morning he told her he wanted a divorce. She thought about the lawyer who had been exceedingly thorough and skilled and had convinced a judge that everything Emma had done for those 12 years was consistent with what any supportive spouse would do, and therefore entitled her to precisely what a supportive spouse was legally entitled to, which was considerably less than what she had actually contributed to building. She thought about all of this in perhaps half a second, the way the mind can compress enormous amounts of experience when it needs to. And then she said very quietly, "You haven't changed, Daniel." Something flickered in his expression, not quite a crack, but a shift, a momentary recalibration. "Neither have you," he said, recovering quickly. "I know," she said. She turned to Michael, whose discomfort had been increasing by visible degrees, and said pleasantly, "Lovely to see you, Michael. Enjoy your evening." She turned to Olivia and gave her a small, genuine nod, not warm, not hostile, just honest. Then she looked at Daniel one more time. "Congratulations on the deal," she said, because she had heard, of course. The real estate acquisition. Another win. She meant it without irony, and she could see he could not quite tell that which was its own small satisfaction. She turned and walked away. She walked toward the end of the bar, Patricia appearing at her side without a word, and she set her water glass down and she breathed, carefully, slowly, the way she had learned to breathe in the 18 months since everything fell apart, deliberately with intention, as though breathing was something you had to choose and not just something that happened. "That was masterfully done," Patricia said, low and fierce. "I'm fine," Emma said. "I know you're fine. I said masterfully done." Emma almost laughed. Almost. She was not fine exactly, but she was something. She was still here. She was still standing in this room with her spine straight and her face calm and her hands steady around a glass of water. She had looked at the man who had taken 12 years of her life and a significant portion of her sense of self, and she had not broken. She had not cried. She had not said any of the things she had imagined saying in the dark hours of too many sleepless nights. She had just said the truth, quietly, and walked away. That was something. Across the room she could see Daniel. He had regrouped quickly. He always regrouped quickly. It was one of the things she had once admired about him, and was now holding court with 3 men in expensive suits, laughing that particular laugh again, entirely at ease. Olivia stood beside him with perfect posture and an expression that conveyed the right amount of attentiveness. Emma watched him for a moment. She thought, this is not the end of anything. This is not a chapter closing. This is just tonight, just this room, just this particular version of the same old story. And she understood in a way she was not sure she had understood before, that the story was not over, not by a long stretch, and that the version Daniel had been telling about himself, about her, about what had happened between them, was not the only version available, was not even the truest version available. She set her glass down, straightened the strap of her small bag, looked around the room, and that was the moment she saw him. She almost missed it. He was not doing anything dramatic. He was standing near the edge of the room talking to a man Emma recognized as a senior partner at one of the largest private equity firms in the country, and he was listening. Not performing, not commanding the room, not positioning himself in the way that powerful men at parties often position themselves, loudly, expansively, filling as much space as possible. He was simply standing there, relaxed and quiet, and listening in the way that very few people actually listen, with his full attention and nothing else. She knew who he was. Everyone in New York finance knew who Alexander Blackwood was. You could not operate in that world for 12 years without knowing his name, without knowing what he had built, and how he had built it, and what he was known for. He was 54 years old. He had made his first billion by the time he was 38. He ran Blackwood Capital Partners, which was not the largest investment firm in the country, but was widely regarded as the most consistently excellent one, the kind of firm that top-tier analysts competed fiercely to work for, and that other firms watched carefully and respectfully. Howe was also known for being almost completely private. There were very few photographs of him in public. He rarely gave interviews. He had been married once briefly in his 30s, and that was that. No scandals, no dramatic public failures, just a long, quiet record of being right about things that other people had been wrong about. She had never met him. She had no particular reason to expect to meet him now. But as she stood near the bar with Patricia, not staring at him, but aware of him, the way you are sometimes aware of a very still thing in a room full of moving ones, he turned his head, and he looked directly at her. It was not a socially choreographed look, not the sweeping survey of a room that men perform at parties when they are assessing the landscape. It was specific, deliberate, as though he had already known she was there and had been waiting for the right moment to confirm it. Emma held the look for a second. Then she turned away because she was Emma Whitmore, and she had been raised with better manners than to stare at strangers at parties, and also because something about that steady, unperformed attention unsettled her in a way she was not prepared to examine. "Did Alexander Blackwood just look at you?" Patricia said. "I wasn't looking at him," Emma said. "I was," Patricia said. "He absolutely just looked at you." "Patricia, I'm just noting it as a data point. Please stop noting data points." Patricia smiled and said nothing, which was in many ways worse. The evening moved forward. Emma spoke to more people. She ate something small from a passing tray. She let herself be drawn into a conversation about emerging market trends that she actually enjoyed because she had always loved the work, loved the clean logic of financial analysis, loved the puzzle-like quality of looking at numbers and seeing patterns that told a story about human behavior and risk and consequence. It was one of the things she had not lost in everything that had been lost, the love of the work itself. She was deep in that conversation when she felt it again, that specific quality of attention arriving from across the room like a slightly different kind of air pressure. She glanced sideways. Alexander Blackwood was 20 feet away, and he was unmistakably watching her talk. She turned back to her conversation, kept talking. Her point was about liquidity risk in Southeast Asian markets, and she made it clearly and well, and the man she was talking to, a fund manager from Boston named Grant, who she had met twice before, was nodding and engaged and responding substantively. When she glanced again a few minutes later, Alexander Blackwood was gone. She felt absurdly a small, flat note of disappointment, which she dismissed immediately as ridiculous. She had more important things to feel than disappointment that a man she did not know had stopped watching her from across a ballroom. She said goodbye to Grant. She went to find Patricia to say she was leaving. Patricia was talking to someone near the main entrance, and when Emma came up, she touched Patricia's arm and said, "I'm going to head out. Thank you for pushing me to come. I mean that." "You're leaving," Patricia said. "It's almost 10. I have a 7 a.m. call tomorrow." Patricia looked over Emma's shoulder at something, and her expression did something complicated. "Emma." "Good night, Patricia." She turned, and almost walked directly into Alexander Blackwood. Howe was standing perhaps 3 feet away, not in her path exactly, but close enough that stopping was the natural thing to do. He was taller than she had registered from across the room, not dramatically tall, but present in a way that had more to do with how he carried himself than with actual height. He was looking at her with that same direct, unperformed attention, and up close it was somehow easier to meet, not more difficult, as though there was nothing in his gaze that required you to brace yourself against it. "Ms. Whitmore," he said. She blinked. "I'm sorry, have we met?" "No," he said, "but I know who you are." It was a strange thing to say, or rather, it would have been strange from almost anyone else. From this particular man in this particular tone, matter of fact, no theater, no pretense of this being a coincidence or a spontaneous introduction, it landed differently, like a door opening. "I know you were the primary architect of the financial strategy behind Carter Industries' first 3 years," he said. "I know that the risk modeling in the Meridian acquisition, which is the deal everyone points to as Carter's defining moment, was your work, not his. I know that you contributed approximately $2.4 million in personal capital during the critical 18-month period after the Series A when the company nearly collapsed. And I know that you received none of that back in the divorce settlement." "Mashi." Emma stared at him. He was not being dramatic about it. He was simply stating things, the way you state facts, the way you say the capital of France is Paris or the river runs north. That's, she started. Accurate, he said. A great deal of information, she finished. Yes, he said. How do you know all of that? Because I was considering acquiring Carter Industries 2 years ago, and I did a thorough due diligence, he said. I decided against it. Not because of the company's fundamentals, which were actually quite sound, because of Daniel Carter. A pause. Specifically because of how he treats people who are useful to him. Emma said nothing for a moment. We decided against the acquisition, Alexander continued, but I kept the research. I find that knowing true things about people is generally useful. He looked at her steadily. You've been in Hoboken for 14 months. You've been doing part-time consulting work that significantly underutilizes your skill set, and you turned down a full-time offer from Mercer Capital in February. They wanted me in Hong Kong, Emma said, startled into answering. I know. He tilted his head slightly. Why didn't you go? I wasn't. She stopped, started again. I wasn't ready. He nodded once, as though that was an acceptable answer, as though he had expected something honest, and that was what it was. Are you ready now? He asked. She looked at him. She thought about all the things she wanted to say about what a strange conversation this was, about the fact that this was not how introductions typically worked, about the 1,000 small questions forming in the back of her mind about who this man actually was beneath the very thoroughly documented surface. She said, That depends on what you're asking me to be ready for. The corners of his mouth moved. Not quite a smile, something more controlled than that, but unmistakably not nothing. I have a situation, he said, a significant one. It involves a transaction that may or may not be exactly what it presents itself as, and the people I've had look at it have not found what I believe is there to be found. I need someone who can look at numbers the way you look at numbers. How do you know how I look at numbers? I read your work, he said simply. She waited. The analysis you did for Harrington Group in 2019, he said. The one that identified the derivative exposure 3 months before everyone else saw it. I had someone track down the original report. He paused. It was impressive, genuinely. Not in the way people use that word to be polite, in the way that means it was actually difficult to do, and you did it correctly. Emma had not thought about the Harrington report in 2 years. It had been one of those pieces of work she was quietly proud of. Clean, rigorous, genuinely useful, that had, like so many of the useful things she had done, been attributed primarily to the team she was part of, rather than to her specifically. That report had 4 names on it, she said. I know, he said. I also know which parts were written by which person. Analysts leave fingerprints. She studied him. I was not flirting. She was attuned to that, attuned to the difference between a man who was interested in her as a person who occupied a body, and a man who was interested in her as someone who was interesting. He was the second thing. It was, she realized slowly, one of the more unusual experiences she'd had in a very long time. What kind of transaction? She asked. I'd rather discuss that somewhere that isn't a party, he said. Would you be available Thursday? For what specifically? A conversation, he said. At my office. 3 hours approximately. I'll pay you for your time regardless of outcome. If you're interested in what I tell you, we discuss next steps. If you're not interested, you walk out with a check and a story about the strangest networking event you've ever attended. He paused. That's the extent of what I'm offering. Emma looked at him for a long moment. Behind her, distantly, she could still hear Daniel's laugh, could still, if she tried, find his voice in the texture of the room, easy, self-satisfied, insulated by money and narrative, and the particular immunity that confident men seem to carry like a second skin. She thought, I am 38 years old, and I have been hiding in Hoboken for 14 months, and a man I have never met just told me more true things about myself in 5 minutes than anyone has said to me in over a year. She thought, this is either very strange or very important, and possibly both. She said, Thursday works. He reached into the breast pocket of his jacket unhurriedly, no theater, and produced a card. He handed it to her. She took it. 9 o'clock, he said. 9 o'clock, she agreed. He nodded once, the way you nod when a thing has been decided. Then he stepped back and moved away, back into the room, with the same quiet, unhurried presence with which he had arrived. Emma stood there holding his card. Patricia materialized at her side in approximately 4 seconds. Emma. I know. Was that? Yes. Did he just? Patricia. I know, Emma said. She looked down at the card. Simple, cream-colored. His name and a phone number. Nothing else. I know. She put the card in her bag. She thought about Thursday. She thought about the way he had said your work, not your husband's company's work, not work you were part of, not a team you contributed to, her work, as a specific thing that belonged specifically to her. She thought, I have not heard someone say that in a very long time. She did not look for Daniel before she left. She did not need to. She pulled on her coat, said a real goodbye to Patricia, and walked out into the October night, down the long steps of the hotel, and out onto the street where the city was doing what the city always does, moving bright, loud, indifferent, endlessly ongoing. She walked. She did not cry. She did not feel triumphant. She did not feel any of the dramatic things the moment might have seemed to call for. She just walked and breathed and felt somewhere underneath everything, something she had almost forgotten the texture of, the very first, very faint tremor of something beginning. She had spent 14 months becoming very small, very still, very careful. She had done it because she had needed to, because you cannot rebuild something from nothing while also trying to perform the version of yourself that existed before everything fell apart. But small and still and careful was not who she was. It was just where she had been. And Thursday, she thought. Thursday was 9 o'clock. She flagged down a cab because the walk back was too far, and she had earned a cab, and she got in, and the city moved around her in its blur of light and noise, and she held her bag in her lap with Alexander Blackwood's card inside it. Behind her, in the blazing windows of the Meridian Grand, Daniel Carter was still laughing. I was laughing the way a man laughs when he is sure of himself, sure of his story, sure that the world is arranged exactly as he has arranged it. He had no idea. He had absolutely no idea what was coming. And Emma, sitting in the cab as it moved through the city, felt something happen in her chest. Not anger, not quite hope, but something sharp and clean and quietly enormous, like a door she had thought was locked, swinging open on its own. She looked out the window at the passing lights. She thought, I am not finished. She thought, I am not even close to finished. The cab crossed over the bridge. The city fell away behind her. And somewhere in the dark ahead, Thursday was waiting. Thursday came faster than Emma expected. She had spent Wednesday night sitting at her small kitchen table in Hoboken with a cup of tea she forgot to drink, turning Alexander Blackwood's card over and over in her fingers. Not because she was uncertain about going. She had decided to go the moment she said yes in that ballroom. She was turning the card over because she was trying to understand what exactly she had said yes to and what it meant that she had said it so quickly, and what it revealed about where she actually was, not geographically, not professionally, but internally in the part of herself she had been carefully not examining for 14 months. She had looked him up, of course. She would have been a fool not to. What she found was both more and less than she expected. The financial record was extraordinary and thoroughly documented. Blackwood Capital Partners had returned an average of 22% annually over 19 years, which was the kind of number that made serious people in finance go quiet and pay attention. 3 failed investments in that entire period, all early, all lessons he had reportedly absorbed and never repeated. The firm was privately held, which meant he owed no one a quarterly explanation of his decisions, which meant he moved differently than the people who did. Faster, sometimes slower, sometimes always deliberately. The personal record was almost nothing. A brief marriage in his mid-30s to a woman named Catherine Hale, who had been a physician. No children, no public explanation for the divorce. She had become a prominent cardiologist in Boston. He had become Alexander Blackwood. They had apparently remained on civil terms, which Emma noted and filed away without knowing exactly why. There were 11 photographs of him available online. She counted. 11 for a man of his stature and his years in the industry. In all of them, he looked exactly the way he had looked in the ballroom, composed, direct, not performing anything for the camera or for anyone else. She put her laptop away at 11 o'clock and went to bed and slept better than she had in months, which she also filed away without examining too closely. She arrived at the Blackwood Capital offices at 8:52 Thursday morning. The building was on 53rd Street mid-block, the kind of address that announced itself through quality rather than drama. The lobby was quiet and clean. A receptionist whose name tag read Marcus greeted her by name before she had said a word, offered her coffee, and told her Mr. Blackwood would be with her momentarily. She had been in a lot of offices over the years. She had walked into rooms where power was performed loudly, and rooms where it was performed quietly, and a few rooms where it was not performed at all, where it simply existed, the way gravity exists, present consequential requiring no announcement. This was the last kind of room. She was on her second careful sip of very good coffee when Alexander Blackwood appeared. I was wearing a dark gray suit, no tie, and the same quality of attention he had worn in the ballroom. He walked directly to her, shook her hand once firm, brief no theater, and said, "Thank you for coming." "Thank you for the coffee," she said. Something shifted in his expression. Not quite amusement. Recognition, maybe. "Follow me," he said. His office was large and not particularly decorated. There was a desk, a long table with chairs, several whiteboards covered in numbers and diagrams that he did not bother to erase or cover before she came in, and 3 floor-to-ceiling windows that let in a great deal of gray October light. On the table were 2 folders, a laptop, and a second cup of coffee that he had clearly prepared to be there when they arrived. He gestured to a chair. She sat. He sat across from her and opened one of the folders. "Hargrove Development Group," he said. She knew the name. Mid-size commercial real estate developer, southeastern United States, had been expanding aggressively into mixed-use urban projects over the past 4 years. There had been some buzz around them in certain circles. "I know who they are," she said. "I know you do," he said. "What do you know about their expansion into the Nashville and Atlanta markets?" "Standard stuff. Aggressive leverage, which isn't unusual for the sector right now. Solid pre-lease numbers on their anchor projects. There was a piece in the Journal last spring that was fairly positive." "Yes," he said. "There was." He slid the folder across to her. "Read the first 10 pages." She read. It took her 8 minutes. She was a fast reader, and she was a focused one, and what she was reading made her slow down twice and go back, because what she was seeing on the page did not match what she would have expected to see. When she looked up, he was watching her. "The pre-lease numbers are fabricated," she said. "That's my belief," he said. "Yes." The anchor tenants listed in the Nashville project, 2 of them dissolved their LLCs within 6 months of signing these letters of intent. The letters are still being presented to investors as active commitments. "Correct." "That's fraud," she said. "That's fraud," he agreed. She looked back down at the folder. "How large is the current raise?" $470 million, he said, of which approximately $230 million has already been collected from investors, 11 of whom are clients of mine. She looked up again. "You have exposure." "My clients have exposure," he said precisely, "which is the same thing as far as I'm concerned." She studied him for a moment. He was not agitated. He was not performing the urgency of the situation. He was simply in it the way competent people are in difficult situations, fully present, no wasted energy on emotion that wouldn't serve. "You've had other people look at this," she said. 3 teams, he said. 2 internal, 1 external. None of them found what you just found in 8 minutes. "They were looking at the wrong thing," she said. "They were looking at the financials. The problem is in the legal entity structure underneath the financials." She tapped the folder. "You have to go 1 layer deeper than where the numbers live." "Yes," he said. "Why didn't your teams go 1 layer deeper?" "Because they were trained to look at what's in front of them," he said. "You looked at what wasn't there." She absorbed that. "What do you need from me?" she asked. "A complete analysis of the entity structure across all Hargrove projects in the past 4 years," he said, "cross-referenced with actual tenant activity, actual permitting records, and the actual capital flows that underlie the stated investor returns. I need to know how deep it goes, how long it's been going on, and what the exposure actually is, not the stated exposure, the real one." "That's 2 to 3 weeks of work," she said. "Minimum." "I know," he said. "You said 3 hours today." "I said approximately 3 hours," he said. "I was describing the conversation. The work is what it is." She should have pushed back on that. Technically, professionally, she should have said something about scope and terms and what exactly she was being engaged to do. But she was already, she realized, doing the thing she did when a problem genuinely interested her. She was already 3 steps into it in her head, already pulling at the threads she'd spotted in those 10 pages, already feeling the particular urgency of a puzzle that had real consequences for real people. She had not felt that in 14 months. She set the folder down, looked at him directly. "What are you paying?" He named a number. She kept her face still. The number was more than she had made in the entire previous year. For the initial analysis, he said, if the scope expands, we renegotiate. And if I find less than you think is there, then I'm wrong, he said simply. And I'll have paid for the peace of mind of knowing I'm wrong. That has value too. She looked at him. She thought, this is a man who is comfortable being wrong. That was rarer than it should have been in the rooms she had spent her career moving through. All right, she said. All right, he said. He pushed the second folder across the table. This one is everything we have so far. Take it with you. I'll have Marcus set you up with secure access to our research servers this afternoon. She reached for the folder, then stopped. There was something she needed to say, and she was going to say it now cleanly before they went any further. I need you to understand something, she said. He waited. I am not doing this because I need the money, she said. I mean, I do need the money, but that's not why I'm saying yes. I'm saying yes because this is a real problem that has real victims, and the kind of analysis you're describing is something I'm actually good at. I'm not a favor. I'm not a charity case. I'm not someone you're giving an opportunity to out of sympathy for what happened to me with Daniel. She said his name deliberately. She wanted it on the table, named and acknowledged, not hovering in the air between them, like something they were both pretending not to see. I know that, Alexander said. I want to be sure. Emma. He said her name the way you say a word when you mean it exactly. I don't do favors. I don't have the patience for them. I looked you up because your work was interesting. I called you because your skill set matches a specific problem I have. What happened with Daniel Carter is relevant to me only as evidence of how comprehensively the people around you failed to recognize what they had. A pause. I don't intend to make that mistake. The room was very quiet. Emma thought, I am not going to cry in this man's office on a Thursday morning. She did not cry. She picked up the folder, stood, extended her hand. I'll have something preliminary to you by end of next week, she said. He stood and shook her hand. Take the time you need to do it right. I always do, she said. She walked out of his office and through the quiet lobby and past Marcus, who told her he would send the server access credentials within the hour, and she pushed through the glass door of the building and out onto 53rd Street, where the city was in full mid-morning motion, and she stood on the sidewalk for exactly 4 seconds before she started walking. Her mind was already working. Already moving through the problem the way a current moves through a landscape, finding the low points, the gaps, the places where something was being carried that shouldn't be there. She had a job, not a part-time consulting role that was really just a way to feel like she was doing something while she figured out what came next. A real job, a serious problem, a client who saw her clearly and was paying her accordingly. She thought almost involuntarily about the moment in the ballroom, Daniel's finger pointing at her. She was never my equal. She was just convenient. She thought he never understood what convenient meant. Because what he had called convenient, what he had looked at for 12 years and seen as background support as the unremarkable infrastructure of his success, was actually this. The ability to walk into a room with a 200-page financial disclosure and see in 8 minutes the thing that 3 professional teams had missed. That wasn't convenient. That was rare. And it had just been recognized by someone who knew the difference. She walked 4 blocks before she realized she was smiling. She stopped walking for a moment, put her hand over her mouth as though she could put the smile back. Then she let it be. It was a small thing, a private thing. Nobody on 53rd Street cared. Nobody was watching. She kept walking. The work began that afternoon. She sat up at her kitchen table in Hoboken because she had always worked best in her own space, ordered in Thai food at 7 o'clock because she forgot to eat and was still working at 1 in the morning because the problem was exactly as interesting as she had feared it would be and also considerably larger. The entity structure underneath Hargrove Development Group's stated projects was a layered interlocking network of shell LLCs that spread across 7 states and 3 offshore jurisdictions. On the surface, it looked like the kind of legitimate corporate complexity that large development groups used for tax efficiency and liability management. 1 level down, it looked like something more deliberate. 2 levels down, it looked like a machine specifically designed to obscure the distance between investor capital and the projects that capital was supposed to be funding. She worked. She made notes. She pulled public records and cross-referenced them with the documents Alexander had provided, and built a map on paper, because she always thought better on paper, drawing lines between entities and dates and names, until the page looked like something between an organizational chart and a web. She found the first dead tenant at 11:15. Meridian Retail Partners, LLC, listed as the anchor tenant for Hargrove's flagship Nashville project, representing 11% of the stated pre-lease revenue. Dissolved by the Tennessee Secretary of State 8 months ago for failure to file required annual reports. No assets, no officers on record for the preceding 14 months. A legal ghost still sitting in the investor documents as though it were a living company with a signed lease and a future. She sat back in her chair, looked at the page, said out loud to her empty apartment, "There you are." She found 2 more that night. By the time she went to bed at 2 in the morning, she had the outline of something large and deliberate and very bad for a significant number of people who had trusted their money to a story that was not true. She also had quietly and without drama the beginning of something she had not had in 14 months. Purpose. Real specific consequential purpose. The kind that comes not from being told you matter, but from doing work that actually does. She slept 5 hours and woke up before her alarm and started again. Over the next 10 days, she worked in a focused, methodical, slightly ferocious way that reminded her of the best periods of her professional life. The years before Daniel's success became large enough to cast a shadow over her own contributions when she had been simply a very good analyst, doing very good work and finding genuine satisfaction in it. She talked to Alexander twice by phone during that period. The conversations were short and direct. He asked good questions. She gave him honest answers about what she had and hadn't confirmed yet. He did not push her to conclusions she hadn't reached. He did not second-guess her methodology. He said both times some version of the same thing, "Keep going." She kept going. On the 11th day, Patricia called. "I heard you're working with Blackwood," Patricia said without preamble. Emma paused. "How did you hear that?" "Emma, this city has approximately 47 people in it and they all talk. How is it?" "It's good," Emma said. And then because it was Patricia, "It's really good." "He's not what people expect, is he?" It wasn't quite a question. "No," Emma said. "He's not." "What is he?" Emma thought about the whiteboards covered in numbers, the quality of attention, the way he said, "I don't do favors," without any apology in it. The specific, unremarkable dignity of being treated as exactly what she was. "He's someone who knows what things are worth," she said. Patricia was quiet for a moment. "Be careful," she said, not warningly, more like something she needed to say. "I'm always careful," Emma said. "You were careful with Daniel too," Patricia said. "That's not exactly what I mean." Emma understood what she meant. She chose not to address it directly because there was nothing to address yet. She changed the subject. They talked for 20 minutes about other things, and when they hung up, Emma sat for a moment with the phone in her hand and thought about Patricia's warning and decided it was the kind of warning that was worth having heard and not necessarily worth acting on. She went back to work. On day 14, she submitted her preliminary analysis to Alexander. It was 43 pages. It identified 7 fraudulent entity relationships, 11 ghost tenants, 2 fabricated permitting approvals, and a capital flow discrepancy of approximately $68 million between what had been represented to investors and what had actually been spent on the projects in question. It also identified in the final section 3 individuals who appeared to be centrally responsible for the structure and had almost certainly been aware of its fraudulent nature from the beginning. She sent it at 10 in the morning. He called at 11:45. "This is extraordinary work," he said. "It's thorough work," she said. "There's a difference." "Not always," he said. "In this case, both." She was at her kitchen table and outside the window. It had started to rain, the kind of gray November rain that made the world look temporarily erased. She had a cup of tea this time that she was actually drinking. "What are you going to do with it?" she asked. "My legal team will move forward with the SEC referral today," he said. "We'll also notify the other institutional investors with exposure, and I'm going to do something else." A pause. "I want to offer you a formal position." She set down her tea. "What kind of position?" "Senior Advisor Special Situations," he said. "It's not a title that exists in our current structure. I'm creating it for you. You'd work on transactions that require a specific kind of analysis situations where the standard approach isn't finding what needs to be found. Compensation is," he named a number, "annual, with equity participation." Emma sat very still. The number was more than she had made at the height of her career. "I'm not doing this out of sympathy," he said. and there was something almost dry in his voice, as though he knew what she was thinking and wanted to preempt it. "I know," she said. "Do you need time to consider it?" She thought about the kitchen table in Hoboken, the part-time consulting work, the 14 months of carefully managed smallness. She thought about Daniel in the ballroom pointing at her, saying she was convenient. She thought about 43 pages that 3 professional teams had not been able to produce. "No," she said, "I don't need time." "Good," he said. "I have a condition," she said. He waited. "I work independently," she said. "I have access to what I need and I follow the problem where it goes. I don't have my conclusions reviewed before they're finalized. I don't have my methodology second-guessed by people who are more comfortable with the conventional approach." "Agreed," he said, without hesitation. "And I need it stated clearly in writing that my work product is attributed to me. Not to the team, not to the firm, to me specifically." There was a pause, not of hesitation, she thought, of something else, something that sounded in a phone call like recognition. "That should have always been the case," he said. "Yes," she said, "it should have." "I'll have legal prepare the agreement today," he said. "You can start Monday." She started Monday. And everything that happened after that began from the simple, irreversible fact that Alexander Blackwood had read her work, understood what it was, and decided that the person who had produced it was someone worth keeping close. The office he gave her was small and had good light and a whiteboard. Marcus brought her coffee without being asked. The analysts who worked down the hall were young and sharp and initially slightly wary of her. She was new. She had appeared from nowhere. She had some undefined but evidently significant relationship with Blackwood that none of them fully understood. And then she sat in on a deal review in her 3rd week, and the wariness adjusted itself into something more like attention. She had that effect on rooms when she was working. When she was actually working, not the diminished, tentative version of herself she had been performing for 14 months, but the real thing, focused, confident, following a thread of logic with the clean determination of someone who trusts their own mind. She had forgotten she could be like this. Not forgotten exactly. Deliberately not looked at it the way you don't look at something that hurts to see. She looked at it now. She let herself be this. 3 weeks into the new role she was in, a late session with 2 of the junior analysts, walking them through her approach to entity structure analysis, when her phone buzzed on the table. She glanced at it. Unknown number. She ignored it and kept talking. It buzzed again, then again. She picked it up. The text said, "We need to talk. It's about Alexander Blackwood. You need to know what you've gotten yourself into." It was signed with a name she didn't recognize, a phone number with a Boston area code, and a single additional line, "I was his wife." Emma set the phone face down on the table, looked at the 2 analysts who were looking at her with the professionally schooled expressions of people who had noticed something happen and were pretending they hadn't. "Where were we?" she said. Not a question, a decision. She picked up her pen and found her place on the whiteboard. But beneath the surface, her mind had already separated into 2 tracks, one that was continuing to explain the mechanics of LLC dissolution patterns and their implications for investor disclosures, and one that was turning over the text message with the same methodical attention she gave to everything that didn't add up. Catherine Hale, the physician in Boston, the brief marriage in his 30s. "We need to talk. You need to know what you've gotten yourself into." She thought about Alexander, about the quality of attention, the whiteboards full of numbers, the simple uncommon decency of being seen accurately and treated accordingly. She thought about the fact that in 6 weeks she had not once felt managed or performed for or handled. She thought, "I am very good at seeing what isn't there." She thought, "The question is whether I'm willing to look." She finished the session. She walked back to her office. She sat down and picked up her phone and looked at the text message for a long time. Then she opened a blank document on her laptop and started a new file. At the top she wrote C. Hale, and under it, in the methodical, clean handwriting she used when she was beginning something that mattered, "What do I actually know? What am I being told, and what's the difference?" Because that was how she worked. That was who she was. And she was not about to stop now. The file Emma had opened sat untouched on her laptop for exactly 2 days. Not because she was afraid of what she might find. Emma Whitmore had never been someone who looked away from uncomfortable information. 12 years of marriage to Daniel Carter had required her to look at a great many uncomfortable things directly, and she had done it, and she had survived. No, the reason she left the file blank for 2 days was more precise than fear. It was discipline. She had learned through hard experience that the worst mistakes in analysis came not from missing information, but from moving too fast toward a conclusion before you had enough to justify it. You could be wrong in the direction of bad news just as easily as you could be wrong in the direction of good news, and both kinds of wrong had consequences. So she waited. She worked. She let the text message from Catherine Hale sit in the back of her mind the way she let all unresolved data sit present, acknowledged, not yet acted on. On the third day Wednesday morning, she called the number. It rang 4 times. She was preparing for voicemail when a woman picked up. The voice was careful, measured, the kind of voice that belonged to someone who had been thinking about what to say for longer than the phone had been ringing. "Emma Whitmore," the woman said, not a question. "Catherine Hale," Emma said. A brief silence. "I wasn't sure you'd call." "I almost didn't," Emma said, which was true. "What do you want to tell me?" Another pause. Longer this time. Emma waited it out without filling it because she had also learned that silence was a tool and that the person who broke it first was usually the one with more urgency and less leverage. "Not on the phone," Catherine said. "Can you come to Boston?" "When?" "Saturday." Emma thought for exactly 3 seconds. "Send me an address," she said. She went to Boston on Saturday morning. The address Catherine had sent was a townhouse in the South End, the kind of neighborhood that communicated success without performing it. Catherine Hale answered the door herself. She was 51, dark-haired, with the straight posture and deliberate calm of a woman who spent her professional life in rooms where panic was not an option. A cardiologist. Emma had looked her up properly in the 2 days between the call and this meeting, published research hospital appointment's professional reputation that was by any measure exceptional. Whatever had happened between her and Alexander, she had built something substantial of her own. They sat in Catherine's living room. Catherine brought coffee. They were both, Emma noticed, being careful, 2 women who did not know each other, assessing the distance between what they'd been told and what was actually true. "I want to say something before I say anything else," Catherine said. "I'm not doing this to hurt him." "Okay," Emma said. "I mean that," Catherine said. "Alex and I, what happened between us was real, and it was painful, and it was a long time ago, and I have not spent the years since trying to damage him. I want that to be clear." "It's clear," Emma said. "Why are you telling me then?" Catherine looked at her steadily. "Because someone told me what happened to you, with your ex-husband, what he did, how he built his career on your work and then erased you from the story." She paused. "And because I think you deserve to know who you're working for, what you're walking into, so you can make a real choice, not a choice based on incomplete information." Emma set her coffee cup down. Her hands were steady. "Tell me," she said. Catherine told her. Alexander Blackwood, at 34, had been a different kind of person than the man Emma had met at 54. Not bad, Catherine was careful to say. Not cruel, but driven in a way that consumed everything around it: relationships, health, anything that required the kind of sustained attention that he was reserving entirely for the work. They had met at a charity event in 2005. They had married 14 months later because they were both old enough to know what they wanted and young enough to believe that knowing was the same as having it. The marriage had lasted 3 years. "I wasn't dishonest," Catherine said. "That's the thing people get wrong about him, the people who know only the public version. He wasn't secretive in a malicious way. He compartmentalized. He kept things in boxes separate from each other, and he was very good at it. Too good." She paused. "I found out in our 2nd year that he had made a significant financial decision, a restructuring of his fund, that changed our personal financial situation substantially without telling me. Not because he thought I wouldn't understand. He knew I could understand. He just didn't think to include me." Emma absorbed that. "Was it a bad decision?" "Financially, no. It was brilliant, actually. One of the moves that really established him." Catherine looked down at her coffee. "That wasn't the point. The point was that I found out from his CFO, at a dinner party, in front of 6 other people." The room was quiet. "I confronted him," Catherine said. "He apologized. He meant it. He said it wouldn't happen again. And then 8 months later, he did it again. A different decision. Same pattern. Same explanation. He hadn't thought to include me because in his mind the work and the marriage existed in separate spaces, and he moved between them without connecting them." "Did he change?" Emma asked. "He tried," Catherine said. And there was something in the way she said it, not bitter, not resigned, but genuinely honest, that told Emma this was a woman who had spent a long time arriving at a clear-eyed understanding of something that had once been very painful. He genuinely tried. But some things about a person are structural. They're not character flaws you can correct with enough intention. They're the shape of how someone's mind works. Alex's mind works in a particular way, and that way is extraordinary at what it does, and it costs something. It cost us. Emma thought about those whiteboards in his office, the 11 photographs online, the brief, efficient phone calls, the way he had said, "I don't do favors without any apology," not because he was hard, but because he had stripped his life down to what he could do excellently and released everything else. "Why are you telling me this now?" Emma asked. "Specifically now, specifically me." Catherine looked at her directly. "Because Alex doesn't hire people the way he hired you. I have mutual connections. I know how this came together, at least the outline. He approached you personally. He created a position for you. He has talked about your work in terms he doesn't use for his own analysts." Emma was very still. "How do you know that?" "Because one of my oldest friends works in your building," Catherine said. "And because Alex called me 3 weeks ago." The air in the room shifted. "He called you," Emma said. "He calls me occasionally," Catherine said. "We've managed to be not close but honest with each other. It took years, but yes." She paused. "He called to tell me he had hired someone. He said, and this is almost exactly his words, he said he had found someone whose mind worked in a way he hadn't encountered before, and he wanted me to know because he thought it was significant." Emma felt something move through her that she did not immediately have a name for. "He told you about me," she said. "He told me about you," Catherine confirmed. "And then he said something that I have not been able to stop thinking about since." She looked at Emma steadily. "He said I don't want to make the same mistake twice." The silence that followed was the loudest thing in the room. Emma sat with it. She thought about the file on her laptop. See Hale. What do I actually know? What am I being told? And what's the difference? She thought about the discipline of not moving toward a conclusion before you had enough to justify it. She thought about all the conclusions she was now carefully beginning to examine. "What does that mean to you?" Emma asked, when he said that. "It means," Catherine said slowly, "that he's aware of the pattern, which is more than he was at 34. She paused. "Whether awareness is enough that I genuinely can't tell you, that's not something I know. It's something you'd have to find out." Emma nodded once. "I'm not telling you to run," Catherine said. "I want to be clear about that. I'm telling you to go in with your eyes open, because you have been in a situation before where you gave a great deal of yourself to someone who was not fully aware of what they had. And I didn't want that to happen again without someone having told you the truth first." Emma looked at this woman, this careful, honest, genuinely decent woman who had driven something difficult across 6 years of complicated history simply because she thought Emma deserved real information. "Thank you," Emma said. She meant it without qualification. She took the train back to New York that afternoon. She sat by the window and watched the landscape move, and she thought methodically and without drama about everything Catherine had told her. She was good at this, at taking information that was emotionally charged and running it through a cooler register, not to deny the emotion, but to understand the information properly before the emotion contaminated her analysis. What she knew, Alexander had been a man who compartmentalized in ways that damaged his marriage. He had tried to change and had not fully succeeded. He was now 20 years later aware of that pattern. He had hired her in a manner that departed significantly from his normal approach. He had told his ex-wife about it. What she did not know, whether the awareness he'd developed translated into anything different in practice. Whether the way he had treated her so far, the clarity, the attribution, the specificity, the simple respect was structural or situational. Whether she was being offered something real or something that would eventually reveal itself to have the same shape as all the other times she had been offered something, and then discovered the terms had been different than stated. What she decided sitting on that train with the November light going gray outside the window, she would keep working. She would keep watching. She would not make any decisions based on fear of what might happen because she had spent 14 months doing that and it had not served her. And she would not make any decisions based on hope about what might happen because she had spent 12 years doing that. She would stay in the evidence. She was good at evidence. She would see what the evidence showed. She got back to New York at 4 in the afternoon. She went to the office because there was a piece of the Hargrove analysis she had been turning over in her mind on the train, and she wanted to check something. Marcus was still at his desk when she came through, which surprised her because it was a Saturday. "You're here late," she said. "Mr. Blackwood is still in," Marcus said. "He usually works Saturday afternoons." She had not known that. She had not known he came in on Saturdays. She processed that small piece of information and added it to the file she was building, not the one about Catherine, but the other file, the one she was building without having consciously decided to build it, the one about who Alexander Blackwood actually was, beneath all the things he appeared to be. She went to her office, pulled up the Hargrove files, found the thread she'd been following. She had been in there for maybe 40 minutes when there was a knock on her open door. She looked up. Alexander was standing in the doorway. I was in a different version of himself than she usually saw. Jacket-off sleeves rolled up, the loosened at the edges look of someone who had been working for several hours in a way that had consumed most of his professional presentation. "I didn't know you were coming in," he said. "I didn't know you came in on Saturdays," she said. He looked at her for a moment. "How was Boston?" She went very still. Then carefully, "How did you know I was in Boston?" He came into the office and sat in the chair across from her desk with the same unhurried quality he brought to everything, and he said, "Because I know Catherine texted you. She told me she was going to." Emma stared at him. "She told you?" "She asked me first if I objected," he said. "I told her I didn't." "You told her you didn't object to her telling me what exactly? What did you think she was going to say?" "The truth," he said. "About the marriage, about what I was like, about what it cost." He met her eyes directly. "She was going to tell you because she believed you deserved to know. She was right." Emma's mind was running fast, processing and recalibrating and running again. "You could have told me yourself." "I could have," he agreed. "Why didn't you?" I was quiet for a moment. Not evasive, she was learning to read the difference in him between silence that was avoidance and silence that was precision. The silence of someone choosing words because the words actually mattered. "Because anything I said about myself would have a motivation you couldn't fully verify," he said. "Catherine doesn't have a stake in this. She's not trying to sell you anything. What she tells you is as close to neutral testimony as you're likely to get about my character." A pause. "You work in evidence. I thought you should have the best evidence available." Emma looked at him. She thought about 12 years with a man who had shaped information for his own benefit so naturally and so consistently that she had eventually stopped noticing he was doing it. She thought about the specific clarifying contrast of sitting across from someone who had just arranged for his own unflattering history to be delivered to her by the person most credibly positioned to deliver it. "That's either very honest," she said slowly, "or very sophisticated." "It can be both," he said. "Yes," she said. "It can." Another silence, different from the others. Something had shifted in the room, and they were both aware of it, and neither of them was pretending otherwise. "She told me what you said," Emma said, "when you called her, that you didn't want to make the same mistake twice." He didn't look away. "That's accurate." "What mistake specifically did you mean?" "Not seeing someone clearly," he said. "Having something rare in front of me and failing to understand what it was. Keeping things in separate spaces when they should have been connected." He paused. "I was good at the work and poor at the rest of it. I've spent 20 years improving the ratio." "Have you succeeded?" "I don't know yet," he said. And then with something in his voice that was neither performance nor deflection. "That's why it matters that you know the history, because the answer to your question depends in part on whether you're paying attention. And I believe you pay attention." Emma sat back in her chair. Outside, the city was doing its Saturday afternoon thing, muted slightly slower than the weekdays, the particular texture of New York, when it has briefly remembered that the people inside it are people and not just parts of a machine. "Say something," Emma said, "and I need you to let me finish before you respond." He nodded. "I am not here because I was saved," she said. "I was not rescued. I was not lifted out of some situation by your particular recognition of my talents, as though without you, I would have remained invisible forever. What you saw in me was there before you saw it. It was there the whole time. It would have eventually been seen by someone, even if that someone had not been you." She paused. "I need that to be the foundation of whatever this is professionally or anything else. I am not a discovery. I am not a project. I am a person who is very good at what she does, who you happen to find and hire and treat correctly. The treating correctly is significant, but it's not the same as being the reason I exist." He had listened without moving, without changing his expression in any of the ways people change their expressions when they are privately formulating their response rather than actually listening. "Yes," he said. "Yes, what? Yes, that's accurate," he said. "Yes, I understand the distinction, and yes, it's the correct foundation." He paused. "I should have said it first. I'm saying it now." Emma breathed. She had not realized until she let it out how much breath she had been holding against that speech. She had been preparing it, she understood now, not for this room specifically, but for a long time. For every room where she had been someone's asset, rather than her own person. For every version of recognition that came wrapped in ownership. She had said it. He had heard it. She picked up her pen, looked back at her notes. "I found something new in the Hargrove structure this afternoon," she said. "There's a seventh jurisdiction I didn't have last week. I want to walk you through it." He pulled his chair closer to the desk without being asked. "Show me," he said. And they worked. For 2 hours on a Saturday afternoon in November, they sat across from each other and worked through the layers of a financial fraud that had real consequences for real people. And Emma talked and Alexander listened and asked good questions, and they were two people doing a serious thing seriously, and it was in its particular way one of the better hours Emma had experienced in recent memory. At 6 o'clock he said, "Have you eaten?" "Not since this morning," she admitted. "There's a place 2 blocks from here," he said. "Quiet. Good food. We could continue there." She looked at him. She was tired and a little electric with the work, and she realized hungry in a way she had not noticed until he named it. "Is this a work dinner?" she asked. "Would you like it to be?" he said. "I'm asking which one you intend," she said. He was quiet for a moment. Then, "Both, if that's acceptable." She considered this. She thought about Catherine Hale, about evidence about the difference between moving too fast and moving not at all. She thought about 14 months of smallness and the specific fatigue of it. She thought about the speech she had just given and how it had landed and what it meant that it had landed the way it had. "It's acceptable," she said. They walked out into the November evening together, two people with a complicated and not yet named thing between them and the city moved around them indifferently, and neither of them said anything for the first half block. And then Alexander said, "You were right, by the way, about the 7th jurisdiction. I should have seen it." "You would have," she said. "Eventually," he said. "That's the difference between eventually and now," she said. "That's what you hired me for." He almost smiled. She was beginning to learn what his almost smiles looked like, the very slight shift at the corner of his mouth, the brief change in the quality of his attention, and she was learning not to make a project out of that knowledge. They ate. They talked about the Hargrove case and then about other things about the nature of risk, about what makes institutions trustworthy or not, about a book they had both apparently read in the last 2 months and had reached completely different conclusions from. He listened the way he always listened. She talked the way she talked when she was not managing herself, not editing for the room, just thinking out loud at the speed her actual mind moved. At 8:30, she said she needed to get back to Hoboken. He walked her out. They stood on the sidewalk for a moment in the cold. "Thank you for coming in today," he said. And then after a pause that had weight to it, "And for going to Boston, and for telling me what you told me in the office, all of it." She looked at him for a moment, felt the particular strangeness of being fully seen, not as something to be used or managed or absorbed into someone else's story, but as the specific, complicated, capable person she actually was. "Good night, Alexander," she said. "Good night, Emma," he said. She walked toward the subway. She did not look back, not because there was nothing to look back at, but because she had learned the difference between things that needed to be carried carefully and things that needed to be allowed to develop at their own pace without too much handling. She went home. She made tea. She sat at her kitchen table and opened her laptop, and she deleted the file she had labeled C. Hale because she had gotten everything from it she was going to get. She opened a new file instead, the Hargrove 7th jurisdiction, and she worked for another hour because the work was not finished. But underneath the work, something else was happening, slower and more private, a rearrangement of the interior landscape she had been so carefully managing for 14 months. Small, undramatic, the kind of change you only notice later looking back. She was not the same person she had been in that ballroom 6 weeks ago, standing still while Daniel pointed at her, and the room laughed. She was not finished becoming whoever she was going to be next, but she was on her way. And for the first time in a very long time, the way forward felt like something she was choosing with open eyes, with full information, with the complete and uncompromised use of her own considerable mind. That was enough. For now, that was more than enough. 3 weeks later, everything changed. The SEC opened a formal investigation into Hargrove Development Group on a Thursday morning. By noon, it was on every financial news outlet in the country. By afternoon, the names of the individuals Emma had identified in her analysis were being reported by sources who had clearly seen documentation that could only have come from one place. Her phone rang at 2:15. Patricia. "Emma," Patricia said, and her voice had that particular quality it had when something large was happening. "Are you watching the news?" "I've been watching for 2 hours," Emma said. "Your work did that." "Our referral did that," Emma said. "Properly filed, properly documented." "Emma," Patricia's voice dropped. Daniel's name just appeared on the investor list. The room went quiet around her. She had not known. She had genuinely not known. The investor list had been sealed as part of the investigation, and she had not had access to the full roster. But apparently in the previous year, Daniel Carter had placed a significant portion of his personal capital into the Hargrove Fund. The same fund Emma had spent 3 weeks dismantling. The same fraud she had identified, documented, and reported. She sat very still. She felt something she had not expected to feel. Not satisfaction, not triumph. Something quieter and more complicated than that. Something that felt almost like sadness. The specific sadness of watching someone who had once been important to you walk off the edge of something you could see, and they couldn't. She had not done this to Daniel. She had not known he was there. She had simply done her job, followed the evidence, told the truth. And the truth had found him on its own. Alexander appeared in her office doorway at 3 o'clock. He looked at her for a moment before saying anything. Then, "You didn't know." "No," she said. "I didn't know." "I want to be clear about that publicly if it comes up," he said. The analysis was complete before any investor names were disclosed. The work stands on its own. "I know," she said. "Are you all right?" he asked. It was a simple question, direct and genuine, no performance around it. She appreciated that the not performing concern, just asking it plainly as a thing that mattered. "I don't know yet," she said, which was the honest answer. He nodded. He did not tell her she should feel this way or that way. He did not offer a narrative for what she was experiencing. He just said, "Take whatever time you need today. The work will be here." She nodded. He left. She sat at her desk for a while looking at nothing in particular. She thought about Daniel in the ballroom, the pointing, the laughter, the specific performance of her diminishment. She thought about 12 years. She thought about all the versions of herself she had been, the one who believed in him, the one who defended him to herself when the doubts began, the one who signed the papers in a lawyer's office and felt something fundamental go out of her like a light. She thought, "I am not who I was in any of those moments." She thought, "Neither is this." This, the investigation. Daniel's name on a list, the particular way the world had arranged itself, was not revenge. It was not closure. It was not the end of a story. It was just what happened when you did honest work in the world. Sometimes honest work had consequences that reached further than you expected. And sometimes the people who had told you that you were nothing were the very ones standing in the path of the truth you were following. She picked up her pen. She went back to work. The investigation moved faster than anyone expected. By the following Monday, 3 days after the SEC announcement, the financial press had already begun running stories that went beyond the basic facts of the Hargrove fraud. They were running the deeper story, the story about who had seen it first, who had documented it, who had built the case that gave federal investigators a roadmap so precise they had reportedly described it internally as the most thorough pre-referral analysis they had received in 11 years. Emma knew this because Alexander told her on Monday morning in her office, standing in the doorway with 2 cups of coffee and the specific expression of a man delivering information he considers significant. "They used that phrase," he said. 11 years. "It was a thorough file," Emma said. "It was an extraordinary file," he said. "There's a difference. You keep making that distinction for other people. I'm making it for you." She took the coffee. She did not deflect this time. She was learning slowly and against considerable internal resistance to simply receive accurate information about herself without immediately qualifying it into something smaller. It was harder than the analysis work. It required a different kind of discipline. "Thank you," she said. He nodded once and left her to work, which was one of the things she had come to appreciate most about him, the way he delivered what needed to be delivered, and then trusted her to do what she did with it. No lingering, no management, just clear communication and then space. She needed the space because the week that followed was not simple. Daniel's name had stayed in the news. Not prominently, he was not a major figure in the Hargrove story, just one of many investors who had been defrauded, but prominently enough that people who knew him and knew Emma were making connections and calling her. Old colleagues, former friends from the years of the marriage. Even a few people she had thought had completely drifted into Daniel's orbit after the divorce, apparently now recalibrating. She did not answer most of the calls. The ones she did answer, she kept brief and neutral. She said she couldn't discuss an active investigation. She said she hoped everyone was well. She said goodbye and meant it. Patricia she talked to properly on Tuesday evening, sitting on her couch in Hoboken with a glass of wine she actually drank this time. "He called me," Patricia said. Emma set her glass down. "Daniel called you. This morning. He wanted to know, and I'm quoting, whether you had anything to do with the SEC thing." "What did you tell him?" "I told him I had no information about an active federal investigation," Patricia said. "Which is technically true, since everything I know from the news and from you telling me you can't tell me anything." "Good," Emma said. "He didn't sound good, Emma." She absorbed that. "No. He sounded, I don't know, like someone who has just understood something that should have been obvious a long time ago and is not handling the understanding well." A pause. "He asked about you. He asked how you were doing." "What did you say?" "I said you were doing well," Patricia said. "I said you seemed like yourself again." He was quiet for a long time after that. Emma stared at the wall of her small apartment. She thought about the ballroom. She thought about the pointing, the laughter, the specific manufactured cruelty of being exhibited as evidence of someone else's growth. She thought about Daniel in the years before the success changed him. The early years, the Brooklyn apartment, the kitchen table with the spreadsheets. He had not always been this person. She had loved him genuinely once, and she did not think she had been wrong to do it. What she had been was insufficiently protected against what he eventually became. "I don't wish him harm," she said finally. "I know," Patricia said. "I also don't wish him anything else right now," she said. I need him to be somewhere that isn't in my line of sight." "That seems fair," Patricia said. They talked about other things. Emma finished her wine. She went to bed and slept 7 hours, which was becoming her new normal, and woke up already thinking about a new situation. Alexander had flagged the previous week a mid-sized insurance company with an acquisition structure that didn't quite add up and that he wanted her to look at next. She was good at this. She was genuinely, specifically good at this in a way that had nothing to do with Daniel and nothing to do with Alexander and nothing to do with any of the external circumstances of the last 3 months. It was hers. It had always been hers. The work itself, the particular quality of attention she brought to it, that was the thing that nobody could take and nobody could give. It existed in her, and it had kept existing in her, even through the 14 months when she had been too diminished to use it fully. She understood now that the 14 months had not been wasted. She had needed the stillness. She had needed to go small for a while, not because smallness was her nature, but because you cannot assess damage from inside the disaster. You have to get out first, get somewhere quiet, then look back and understand what happened. She had done that. She had looked back. She understood what happened. And now she was here. On Thursday of that week, 2 things happened that she did not see coming. The first was a phone call from a journalist named Rachel Sue, who wrote for a major financial publication and had apparently been covering the Hargrove story from a broader angle, not just the fraud itself, but the analysis that had uncovered it. Rachel had gotten Emma's name from a source she would not disclose and was requesting an interview. Emma said no without deliberating. She was not ready to be a public story. She was not sure she ever wanted to be a public story. And more practically, she was in the middle of active work that public attention would complicate. She told Rachel to direct any press inquiries to Blackwood Capital's communications team and hung up. She went directly to Alexander's office and knocked on the open door. He looked up from his desk. "A journalist called me," she said. "Rachel Sue." "I know," he said. "She called our communications team this morning. We've been managing it." He paused. "I was going to tell you today. I should have told you immediately. I'm sorry." She looked at him. The apology was direct and without qualification, and she recognized with a clarity she could not have had 6 months ago how rare that was. Not the word sorry, but the actual thing underneath them. The acknowledgement that something had been handled in a way that affected her without including her, and that this was wrong, and that it would not happen again. "Don't do that again," she said. "I won't," he said. She believed him. Not blindly, she was not a person who believed things blindly anymore, if she ever had been, but because she had spent 3 months watching how he operated, and the pattern was consistent. When he made errors, he acknowledged them and adjusted. The adjusting was real, not performed. "What is Rachel Sue writing?" Emma asked. "A feature on the role of independent analysts in securities fraud cases," he said. "She has enough of the story that the piece will reference the Hargrove analysis regardless. The question is whether you want any control over how your contribution is characterized." Emma thought about this. "What do you think?" He tilted his head slightly, the gesture she had come to recognize as him taking a question seriously rather than answering reflexively. "I think your work will eventually be publicly known regardless of what you do. The question is whether you tell your own version or let someone else tell it for you." A pause. "You've had experience with the second option." That landed precisely where it was meant to. Not cruelly, just accurately. "Set up a call with Rachel Sue for next week," Emma said. "I'll talk to her, on my terms." "I'll have Marcus arrange it," he said. She turned to leave, stopped. "You said 2 things happened Thursday. What was the second?" He had not said that. She had not yet told him there were 2 things. She had walked in talking about the journalist. I was looking at her with the quality of attention that she was. She understood now going to spend a significant amount of time learning the precise meaning of, "You knew about something else," she said slowly, "before I came in." "Yes," he said. "Tell me." He stood up from his desk, came around to the front of it, which was something she had noticed he did when he was about to say something he considered important enough to say, from a standing position without the desk between them. "The Harrington Group," he said. "The analysis you did for them in 2019, the one I told you about when we met." She nodded. "Their senior partner, James Harrington, has been talking to some people," Alexander said. "He's been telling the story of that analysis accurately, it appears, including the specific attribution. Who actually did the work. He's apparently been doing it for a while, but the Hargrove story has given it new relevance." He paused. "People are listening now in a way they weren't before." Emma stood very still. "He's been telling people the work was mine," she said. "Specifically, not the team's. He told me directly when I called him last month," Alexander said. "I asked him about the report. He said, and I'm giving you his exact words, the analysis was Emma Whitmore's work start to finish. The other names on that report were present for the process. She was the process." The room was very quiet. Emma thought about the Harrington report, about the 3 other names on the cover, about the meeting where the findings were presented, and the senior partner of her firm at the time had used the word "we" throughout, and she had sat at the table and said nothing, because that was what you did. That was how these things worked. That was the price of being in the room. She had been erased from that story so thoroughly and so automatically that she had almost accepted it as the correct version. James Harrington had apparently not. "He's been telling the truth," she said. "He's been telling the truth," Alexander confirmed. She breathed out slowly. It was not a dramatic breath. It was the breath of someone who has been holding something for a long time and has just been given permission to set it down. "Why didn't you tell me this when you called him?" she asked. "Last month. That was before the Hargrove referral." "Because I thought if I told you, then you would wonder whether the job offer was partly about correcting a historical wrong rather than about your actual current capabilities," he said. "I thought it would complicate your ability to assess the offer clearly." She looked at him for a long moment. "That was a judgment call." "Yes," he said. "It was the right call," she said slowly. "I don't love that you made it without telling me, but it was the right call." "I know you don't love it," he said. "That's why I'm telling you now." She thought about Catherine Hale's word, compartmentalized. She thought about the difference between compartmentalization as a way of controlling people and compartmentalization as an attempt, imperfect, well-intentioned, occasionally miscalibrated to protect the integrity of a situation. The distinction mattered. It was not the same thing. "Don't do it again," she said. "That seems to be the recurring instruction," he said, and there was something in his voice that was not quite a smile, but was adjacent to one. "Because it keeps being relevant," she said. She went back to her office. She sat down. She put her hands flat on the desk and looked at them for a moment. The hands that had built the Harrington report, that had built the Hargrove analysis, that had written the financial models in the early Carter Industries years, while Daniel was having dinner with clients and building his public face. Her hands, her work, her name now attached to it. She picked up her pen and went back to the insurance company file. The piece in Rachel Sue's publication ran the following Wednesday. Emma had done the call on Monday 2 hours, and she had been precise and honest and careful about what she said and what she didn't say. Rachel was good, genuinely good, the kind of journalist who was actually listening rather than just waiting for confirmable quotes, and the piece reflected that. The headline read, "The Analyst Who Built the Case." The subheading was, "How One Woman's Financial Forensics Brought Down a $500 million fraud and Why You've Never Heard of Her Until Now." The piece told the story cleanly. It named her. It described the Hargrove analysis in technical enough detail to be credible and accessible enough to be readable. It quoted James Harrington on the Harrington report. It quoted Alexander briefly, one paragraph with a quote he had approved in advance, saying that Emma Whitmore was one of the most precise and consequential analysts he had encountered in 30 years in the industry. It did not mention Daniel Carter. Emma had specifically requested that. Rachel had agreed. The story was not about Daniel. The story was about the work. And Emma had learned in these months to be very precise about what the story actually was. She read the piece at 6 in the morning, sitting at her kitchen table in Hoboken with her first cup of coffee. She read it twice. She thought it was accurate. She felt strange about it in a way she did not immediately have language for, not uncomfortable, not proud exactly, but something in between. The experience of being visible after a long time of not being visible, which was its own kind of adjustment. Her phone started ringing at 7:15 and did not really stop until well into the afternoon. Some of it was professional people from her past former colleagues, analysts, who had worked adjacent to her during the Carter Industries years, people from firms she had dealt with. Respectful, slightly sheepish, some of them, in the way of people who are aware they had underestimated something and are now finding words for the adjustment. She was gracious. She was brief. She did not say, "Where were you for the past 14 months?" She did not say, "I know you were at Daniel's dinner parties after the divorce." She said thank you, said she was glad the work had been useful, said goodbye. At 11:30, Patricia called. "The article is extraordinary," Patricia said. "You should hear how people are talking about it." "Which people?" Emma asked. "All of them," Patricia said. "Emma, I got 4 calls this morning from people asking if I know you personally. People I have been trying to get meetings with for 2 years. Emma almost laughed. "Patricia." "I'm not complaining," Patricia said. "I'm reporting. The landscape has changed. The way people are talking about you, it's not the way they were talking about you 6 weeks ago." "6 weeks ago they weren't talking about me at all," Emma said. "Exactly," Patricia said. "Now they are." At 1 o'clock in the afternoon, Emma received an email from an address she did not recognize. It was short. No subject line. It said, "I read the piece. The Harrington analysis was yours. I always knew it was yours. I should have said so at the time. I didn't. I'm sorry it took this long for the right people to know. The work was exceptional. You always were." It was signed by a name she recognized, the senior partner at the firm she had been working for in 2019, the one who had said "we" throughout the presentation, while Emma sat at the table and said nothing. She read the email twice. She thought about what it would have meant to receive it in 2019 or in 2020 or in the dark months of 2022 when the divorce was finalizing, and she was trying to understand what remained of her professional identity after everything had been legally and narratively stripped away. It would have meant everything then. Now it meant something smaller and different, not nothing but something proportional to what it actually was, which was one person's belated recognition of a truth that had always been true. The truth had not changed. The recognition had arrived late. Both of these things could be simultaneously real. She wrote back, "Thank you for saying so." She sent it and went back to work. That evening, Alexander called. Not a work call. She could tell from the first 2 words he said her name differently when it was not a work call. She had noticed this gradually and had filed it in the category of things she was observing but not yet acting on. "Have you eaten?" he asked. "Yes," she said. "Patricia made me have lunch. She's been very organized about this today." "She's a good friend," he said. "She's been carrying me for about 4 months," Emma said. "I'm hoping to eventually return the favor." There was a pause that had warmth in it, which was something she was also learning to read in him, the difference between his silences, what each particular quality of quiet meant. "The piece was good," he said. "It was accurate," she said. "Which is better than good," he said. "Yes." Another pause. Then, "I want to tell you something, and it's not a work thing, so if you need it to be a work thing right now, I can wait." She was sitting on her couch shoes off the remains of the day all around her. She was tired in the clean way of someone who has done a great deal of something that mattered. She thought about what Catherine had said, about going in with your eyes open, about real choices based on real information. She thought, "I have real information. I have been paying attention. I know what this is and what it isn't and what it might become if both people involved are honest and careful and willing to look directly at hard things." "Tell me," she said. "I've been thinking about something since Saturday," he said. "The dinner, the conversation in the office. I've been trying to find the right words for it and not succeeding particularly well, which is unusual for me, so I'm going to say it plainly and you can do whatever you want with it." "All right," she said. "I think this is something," he said, "between us. I think it has been something for longer than either of us has named it, and I don't know what the right pace is or the right way to approach it given everything, given your history, given my history, given the fact that we work together, and that has its own complications. But I know that the way I think about what I'm doing has changed since you've been in it, and I thought you should know that." Emma was quiet for a long moment. She thought about 12 years of a marriage that had taught her slowly and thoroughly to mistake performance for substance. She thought about the ways she had learned to read the difference through pain, mostly the way most hard lessons come. She thought about what it felt like when someone was performing feeling versus when they were simply having it and saying so. This was the second thing. "I think it's something too," she said. She did not say more than that. Not because she didn't have more, but because that was enough for tonight. That was the truth she had and could speak, and anything beyond it would have been reaching into territory that required more than one evening and one conversation. He seemed to understand this. "Good," he said. "Simple, like a door opening at the right pace." They talked for another 20 minutes about smaller things, a book she had mentioned last week that he had apparently gone and purchased the insurance company file, and a question he had about one of her preliminary notes, whether she thought the November weather in New York was fundamentally depressing or just appropriately honest about the season. She said the second one. He said he'd never considered that framing before. When they said goodnight, she sat for a while after and listened to the sound of her apartment, which was small and not particularly glamorous but was hers, and thought about everything that had happened in the 3.5 months since a ballroom in Manhattan and a pointing finger and a room that laughed. She thought this is what forward actually feels like. Not dramatic, not triumphant, just the consistent accumulation of days in which you are doing real things, being seen accurately, and choosing with open eyes. She went to bed and slept deeply and did not dream about Daniel Carter at all. What she did not know yet, could not have known, because it happened at 11:47 that night while she was asleep, was that Daniel Carter had called his lawyer. Not about the SEC investigation, which was being handled by a separate legal team. About Emma. About the Harrington analysis. About the article Rachel Sue had written, which had apparently been shared widely enough in the right circles that by the end of Wednesday it had reached people who had been involved in Emma's divorce settlement. Specifically, it had reached the judge who had overseen the settlement, and the judge who had been a civil litigator for 22 years before being appointed to the bench, and who had a long memory for cases that nagged at her, had called her own former clerk, who now worked in private practice, and said, "I want to look at the Carter divorce record again. I want to look at it carefully." This was not something Emma would know about for another 6 days, but it was already in motion. The truth, once it starts moving, is very difficult to stop. It had been moving since October, since the ballroom, since Alexander Blackwood set down his drink and turned to look at a woman whose worth was being publicly performed as worthlessness. It had been moving through the Hargrove analysis and the SEC referral and the Rachel Sue piece and James Harrington's belated honesty and a judge who could not quite let something go. It moved at its own pace. It did not require Emma to push it. She was asleep in Hoboken, and the city was doing its nighttime thing, and somewhere across the river, Daniel Carter was sitting in the living room of the townhouse that the divorce had let him keep reading the article about his ex-wife on his phone, and the expression on his face was one that no one who knew him would have recognized, because it was the expression of someone who has just understood, with the specific clarity that arrives too late, that they have made an irreversible error. Not a legal error, not a financial error, a human one, the worst kind, the kind you cannot pay your way out of, or narrative your way out of, or charm your way out of, the kind that simply sits with you in the quiet of a late Wednesday night, while across the river, the woman you dismissed is sleeping, the sleep of someone who has nothing left to hide and nothing left to prove. He sat with it, and Emma slept, and the truth kept moving. 6 days after Emma fell asleep, not knowing about the judge, she found out. It came through her lawyer, a woman named Diane Chu, who had represented her during the divorce and who called on a Tuesday morning at 8:43 while Emma was on her second cup of coffee and deep into the insurance company analysis. "I need you to sit down," Diane said. "I'm already sitting," Emma said. "Good. Keep sitting." A pause, the kind of pause that lawyers use when they are organizing consequential information. "I received a call yesterday afternoon from a clerk in Judge Patricia Mercer's office. Judge Mercer presided over your divorce settlement." Emma set down her coffee. "I remember who she is. Judge Mercer has requested a formal review of the Carter divorce record," Diane said. "She's citing newly surfaced public information that may be materially relevant to the accuracy of asset and contribution disclosures made during settlement proceedings." The room went very quiet around Emma. "She's reopening it," Emma said. "She's reviewing it," Diane said carefully, "which is the step before reopening. But yes, that's the direction this is moving." Emma thought about the Rachel Sue article, about James Harrington's quotes, about the specific documented publicly available evidence that the work attributed during the divorce to a team and to general marital support had in fact been the work of one specific person, her, and that this had been known by people who had not said so during proceedings. "This is because of the article," Emma said. "The article provided the trigger," Diane said. "But Judge Mercer is a thorough person. If she's requesting a review, it's because she believes there's something substantive to review." A pause. "Emma, if she finds what I think she's going to find, if the record shows that Daniel's legal team materially misrepresented the nature of your contributions, we could be looking at a significant adjustment to the settlement terms." Emma absorbed that slowly. She thought about the number that had been stated in the final settlement document, the number that had felt when she signed it like the official price tag on 12 years of her life. She had accepted it not because it was fair, she had known it was not fair, but because fighting it further would have required resources and energy she did not have, and because her lawyer at the time had told her honestly that winning a larger share would be very difficult, given how thoroughly Daniel's team had constructed the narrative. "What would significant mean?" Emma asked. Diane named a range. Emma was quiet for a long moment. "That's real money," Emma said. "Yes," Diane said. "It is. Is this certain, or is this a possibility?" "At this stage, it's a process," Diane said. "The review happens first. I'll need to prepare a comprehensive response for the court, which means I need to meet with you as soon as possible. But I want you to understand the reason Judge Mercer is moving on. This is because the public record now contains corroborating testimony from a third party who has no stake in the outcome. James Harrington has no reason to protect Daniel Carter. His statement in the article, naming you specifically as the architect of the Harrington report, is exactly the kind of independent corroboration that makes a court take another look." Emma thought about the email she had received from the senior partner. "Thank you for saying so." She had written back 2 words and moved on. She had not understood at the time that it was also a document, that it was in the record of events a confession. "I'll come in tomorrow," Emma said. "I'll clear my morning," Diane said. When Emma hung up the phone, she sat very still for a full minute. She was not thinking about the money exactly, or not only about the money. She was thinking about the specific and particular experience of being in a courtroom 3 years ago and hearing her 12 years of contribution reduced to the legal language of spousal support, of watching a narrative she knew to be false get officially stamped and dated and filed, of leaving that courthouse with a number that said, in the most binding language available, "This is what you were worth." And now a judge was looking at the record again, not because Emma had fought, Not because Emma had pushed, because she had done her work, and her work had been seen, and a man she barely knew had told the truth in a newspaper, and a judge with a long memory had read it. The truth kept moving. She called Alexander at 9:15, not because she owed him the information, but because he was the person she wanted to tell. "The judge who handled my divorce is reviewing the settlement," she said when he picked up. A beat. "Because of the article." "Because of the article and because of Harrington's statement," she said. "Diane thinks there may be grounds for a material adjustment." He was quiet for a moment. "How do you feel?" It was the right question. Not what does this mean financially, not what are your legal options, not any of the forward-facing practical things. How do you feel, right now in this moment, about this specific thing? "Strange," she said. "Not triumphant, just strange, like watching a building fall that you've been standing next to for a long time. You always knew it was structurally unsound. Watching it actually go is different from knowing it will." "Yes," he said, "it is." "I have to go see Diane tomorrow morning," she said. "Take whatever time you need," he said. And then, "Emma, the work you did, the Hargrove analysis, the way people are now talking about you, the article, none of that was aimed at this outcome. You know that." "I know," she said. "I want to make sure you hear it from outside your own head," he said. "You did honest work. The rest is the world reorganizing itself around honesty. That's not revenge. That's just what happens when the record gets corrected." She pressed her hand flat against her desk, felt the solid, specific reality of it. "Thank you," she said. "I'll see you when you're back," he said. She met with Diane the next morning for 2.5 hours. It was thorough and careful and occasionally difficult. There were documents to revisit that Emma had not looked at since the day she signed them, records of her financial contributions that were painful to read again in the clean light of what she now understood they represented. Diane was precise and kind in the way of someone who is very good at their job and takes seriously the human stakes inside the legal ones. When they were done, Diane walked her to the door and said, "I know this isn't easy to revisit." "No," Emma said. "For what it's worth," Diane said, and she paused in the way of someone who does not usually editorialize. "I always believed the settlement was wrong. I wasn't able to prove it at the time. I'm glad we may have the opportunity now." Emma nodded. She put on her coat. She went back to work. The review took 3 weeks. During those 3 weeks, Emma worked. She finished the insurance company analysis, another instance of someone representing something as more solid than it was, which she was beginning to understand was her particular professional specialty, finding the places where the story and the reality had quietly diverged. She took 2 new engagements that came in partly as a result of the Rachel Sue piece, both smaller than the Hargrove situation, both interesting, both requiring exactly the kind of focused forensic attention she was best at. She and Alexander had dinner twice during those 3 weeks. Not work dinners, or not primarily the work, was always present in the way that work is present between people who are both genuinely engaged with it, but it was not the center of the evenings. The center of the evenings was something quieter and more complicated, and she was finding more worth her attention than she had originally allowed herself to admit. How was different from what she had expected. Not in the large ways those she had assessed accurately, but in the small ones. He had opinions about films that were specific and occasionally wrong. He cooked apparently, and cooked well, which she discovered when he invited her to dinner at his apartment, and she arrived to find him in the kitchen with his sleeves rolled up and genuine concentration on his face. How was uncomfortable at parties he had not chosen to attend, and comfortable at the ones he had, which was a distinction she found she shared. He had a quality of remembering things she had said, not the professional things, but the personal ones, the small observations she made in passing, that she did not think anyone was particularly tracking and referencing them later in ways that were not showing off, but were simply the evidence of someone who had actually been listening. She was listening too. She was building a real picture, not the version she'd initially assessed competent, private, unusual, but the fuller version that you only get through time and proximity and the specific honesty of small moments. She was building it deliberately the way she built everything, without rushing toward a conclusion she hadn't yet earned. She understood happy, not dramatically, not in a way that announced itself, but in the steady, reliable daily way of someone who is doing work that matters, being seen accurately by someone who has earned the right to see her, and living in a life she has chosen rather than a life that was chosen for her. Patricia pointed this out on a Wednesday afternoon when they had lunch. "You look different," Patricia said. "I sleep more," Emma said. "It's not the sleep," Patricia said. You look like yourself, the version of yourself I knew before all of it, before Daniel really took hold." She paused. "Actually, you look better than that version. That version was always a little performing. This one isn't performing anything." Emma thought about that for a moment. "I think I stopped being afraid," she said. Of what? Of what happens if I just am who I am, without managing it for someone else's comfort." She paused. "That sounds simpler than it is." "No," Patricia said. "It sounds exactly as hard as it is." On a Friday 3.5 weeks after Diane's initial call, the review concluded. Judge Mercer issued a ruling that found material misrepresentation in the original settlement disclosures, specifically regarding the characterization and valuation of Emma's intellectual and financial contributions to Carter Industries during its foundational period. The ruling amended the settlement terms. The amended number was substantially larger than the original. Diane called Emma at 2 p.m. Emma listened to the full explanation. She asked 2 clarifying questions. She thanked Diane. She hung up. She sat at her desk. The number Diane had stated was enough to buy real security, real options, the kind of financial ground that meant she could do the work she wanted to do rather than the work she needed to do, that the fear of the next month could be permanently retired as a factor in her decisions. It was also, she thought, the official acknowledgement of something she had known and been unable to prove for 3 years, that what she had given to that marriage and that company had been real and specific and worth naming. Not because money was the point, it wasn't and never had been, but because money was how the legal system said this was true. We looked at it. We confirmed it. The record now reflects the actual facts. The record. She thought about how much of her adult life had been shaped by official records that did not reflect the actual facts. The divorce record, the deal records that named Daniel's vision and omitted hers, the report cover pages with 4 names where one did the work, the invisible scaffolding of other people's success that she had built and been erased from quietly and systematically over more than a decade. The record now reflected the actual facts. She picked up her phone, called Alexander. He picked up on the second ring. "The ruling came in," she said. "I know," he said. "Diane called me as a courtesy because she knew I'd want to know and thought you might not mind." Emma paused. "I don't mind," she said. She meant it. 3 months ago, she might have had a complicated reaction to that, to someone in her life being given information about her situation, even with good intentions. Now she understood the difference between being managed and being cared for, and she was not going to punish the second thing for resembling the first. "Are you at the office?" he asked. "Yes." "Don't move," he said. He appeared in her office doorway 12 minutes later. He must have walked quickly, which was something she could not entirely picture, and also found privately very moving, carrying 2 cups of coffee from the place 2 blocks away that had become over the past months their default. He handed her a cup. He did not make a speech. He did not perform the magnitude of the moment. He just sat in the chair across from her desk and looked at her with that direct, unperformed attention and said, "How are you?" "I keep getting asked that," she said. "It keeps being the right question," he said. She thought about it honestly. "Settled," she said finally. "Not happy in a noisy way, just settled, like something that has been slightly out of alignment for a long time has finally been put back where it belongs." He nodded. Understanding it, she thought, not just agreeing with it. "What are you going to do with it?" he asked. Not about the money specifically, she understood. He meant the broader thing, the new position, the corrected record, the forward motion of a life that was now unmistakably her own again. She had been thinking about this. She had been thinking about it, in fact, for longer than she had admitted to herself, since the early weeks at Blackwood Capital, when she had first begun to feel the returning weight of her own competence and had started quietly and without plan, imagining what she might do if she were not doing this. "There are women," she said carefully, "who are in the position I was in, not just in finance across industries. Women who have built things alongside someone whose work has been absorbed into someone else's narrative, who find themselves on the other side of a relationship or a career collapse with real skills and no way to demonstrate them because the record doesn't show their name." Alexander was listening, fully, the way he always listened. "I want to build something for them," she said. "A fund or a foundation, I'm not sure of the structure yet. Something that provides capital and access and mentorship to women who are where I was 18 months ago. Who are trying to start over after being erased, who have something real to offer, but no platform from which to offer it." The room was very quiet. That's what you want to do with it, he said. That's what I want to do with part of it, she said. The work here continues. I'm not going anywhere, but I think this is the thing I want to build that belongs to me. Separate from Blackwood. Separate from anything else. Mine. He looked at her for a long moment. I think, he said slowly, that is the most precisely right use of what has happened to you that I could possibly imagine. She almost smiled. You're not going to offer to fund it? No, he said. It needs to be yours. I'll refer people to it. I'll tell anyone who asks that it's the best thing in its category. But the capital and the structure need to be yours. A pause. You know why? She did know why, because the entire point was that it needed to come from her, from what she had built and reclaimed and been given back by a court that finally looked at the facts. That was the only version of it that meant anything. A foundation for women who had been erased, funded by the money a court awarded because she had been erased. That was not a coincidence. That was a completion. Yes, she said. I know why. They stayed in her office for another hour, talking through ideas, not formally, not as a project, just the way two people talk when they are both interested in the same problem and trust each other's thinking. She took notes on a legal pad. He asked questions that pushed her thinking somewhere more specific. She realized exactly the kind of conversation she had imagined having for years with a partner in the real sense. Someone who engaged with her ideas as ideas rather than as things to be approved of or managed or folded into someone else's agenda. She had not had this before. She had thought she was having it in the early years with Daniel. She had been wrong. She understood now with the clean clarity of significant distance that what she'd had with Daniel was something else, a collaboration in which one person's contribution was gradually reclassified as support until it became invisible. That was not partnership. She had mistaken it for one because she had not yet encountered the real thing. The real thing was this: a man who said it needs to be yours and meant it and did not find that diminishing. She drove home to Hoboken that night. She had bought a car 2 months ago, a practical decision that had nonetheless felt enormous, the reclaiming of ordinary mobility, and she called her mother on the way. Her mother was 71 and lived in Connecticut and had watched the last 3 years of Emma's life with the specific restrained anguish of a parent who knows that helping too much is itself a kind of harm. The ruling came in today, Emma said. Her mother was quiet for a moment. Diane told me it was coming. She didn't tell me the outcome. It went our way, Emma said. Her mother made a sound that was not quite words. Emma understood it completely. I'm okay, Mom, Emma said. I'm actually okay, not managing it okay, actually. I know, her mother said. I can hear it. I've been listening to your voice for 38 years. I know the difference. A pause. And then with the specific directness of a woman who had raised her daughter alone and had therefore learned to say the true thing when it needed to be said, I'm proud of you, not for the ruling, for everything you did to get yourself back. That took more than I think anyone knows. Emma drove and held the phone and felt something move through her that was large and not entirely comfortable and entirely worth feeling. Thank you, she said. I think it took more than I knew too. The next morning, she called Diane and told her to proceed with the transfer and documentation. She spent the afternoon with a lawyer who specialized in nonprofit structure, beginning the formal conversations about what her foundation would look like. She called it in those initial conversations simply the Whitmore Initiative, which felt both too big and exactly right. She wrote the mission statement herself in one sitting at her kitchen table in Hoboken on a Saturday morning in December, with her second cup of coffee and the particular quality of winter light that she had learned in 18 months in this apartment to find genuinely beautiful rather than just acceptable. She wrote, this organization exists for women who were told their work didn't count. It exists because talent does not disappear when it goes unrecognized. It exists to find the women who are sitting in small apartments trying to figure out what comes next, and to tell them we see the work. We know it was real. Here is what we can give you to make the next chapter yours. She read it back, changed 2 words, read it again, left it. 2 weeks later, on a Thursday evening in mid-December, a charity gala was held at a hotel in Midtown Manhattan. It was a significant event, the kind that raised real money for real causes, and that drew the genuine upper tier of New York's financial and philanthropic world. Not just the people who wanted to be seen at such things, but the people who actually wrote the checks. Emma went with Alexander, Not as his employee, not as his analyst, as the person she was, which was also now publicly and officially and with no ambiguity available for anyone to exploit, Emma Whitmore, founder of the Whitmore Initiative Senior Advisor at Blackwood Capital Partners, the woman whose financial forensics had been described by the SEC as instrumental in the largest securities fraud prosecution in 11 years. She wore a dress that was not simple. It was not expensive in the way of someone trying to signal money. It was expensive in the way of someone who had chosen exactly what she wanted and was wearing it because she wanted to. She looked like herself, the full version, the one Patricia had named weeks ago, not performing anything, not managing anything, just present in her own life with the complete and unguarded use of her own considerable self. They arrived together. People noticed. She had known people would notice, and she had decided in advance that she was not going to let the noticing change anything about how she moved through the room. She moved through the room the way she moved through rooms now, with the confidence of someone who knows what she knows and does not need the room to confirm it. She was talking to a foundation director about the Whitmore Initiative when she became aware at the edge of her attention of Daniel. How was across the room? He had come alone. She registered this without drama, noting it as information. He was thinner than he had been in October. He looked like a man who had been dealing with things, which was accurate because he had been. The SEC investigation, the loss of several major investors who had quietly exited their positions in Carter Industries following the Hargrove Association, the departure of Olivia that had happened quickly and with very little public noise, which Emma had heard about through Patricia and had received with neither satisfaction nor particular surprise. She did not go to him. She did not avoid him. She simply let her attention rest on the conversation she was having, which was more interesting. He came to her. She was aware of his approach before she saw it, some old, deep muscle memory of his presence moving through a room. She did not stop her conversation. She finished her point. She turned when it was natural to turn. He was standing perhaps 5 feet away. He looked at her for a long moment without saying anything. She let him look. She had nothing to hide and no performance to manage and no version of herself to protect, which meant she could simply stand there and be looked at and feel entirely comfortable. "Emma," he said. "Daniel," she said. He glanced briefly at the space beside her where Alexander stood, then back to her face. "You look well," he said. But this time he meant it. This time it was not the carefully constructed diminishment of October. This time it was simply the truth stated by someone who was finally, perhaps for the first time, capable of seeing her clearly because he had lost the investment in not seeing her clearly. "Thank you," she said. A pause. "I owe you an apology," he said. The words were careful. She could tell he had prepared them, had probably rehearsed some version of this conversation in his head over the past weeks. More than one, for a long time. I handled a great many things in a way that was... He stopped, started again. I told myself a story about what you were and what I was and what we were, and it wasn't true. I knew parts of it weren't true, and I kept telling it anyway because it was a convenient story. You called me that. In the ballroom. You were right. She looked at him steadily. She thought about what she wanted to say. She had imagined this moment in various forms in the dark months. She had imagined saying devastating things. She had imagined being cold or withering or triumphant. She had imagined the scene in which the full truth of what he had done was placed in front of him clearly enough that he could not look away. None of those imagined versions felt accurate anymore. What she actually felt standing here was something quieter and more final. Not forgiveness exactly, not the kind that required warmth, but a kind of release, the specific and permanent release of someone who has stopped needing a particular person to understand what they did, because that understanding has stopped being the thing that determines her worth. "I know you handled things badly," she said. "I know it wasn't true. The court knows it now too, which matters for the record, if not for anything else." She paused. "I'm not carrying it anymore, Daniel. I want you to know that. Not for your sake, for mine. Because carrying it was heavier than anything you ever gave me." He said nothing for a moment. His jaw tightened in the way of someone receiving something they had earned and are finding it more difficult than they expected. "What you built," he said finally. "The foundation. I heard about it." "Yes," she said. "It's good work," he said. It's the right thing." A pause. "I know that doesn't mean much coming from me." "It means something," she said. "Not everything, but something." She looked at him directly, and what she felt was clear and clean and completely hers. Take care of yourself, Daniel. I mean that simply, not as a performance. Just take care of yourself." She turned and went back to Alexander, who was talking to someone nearby and who glanced at her when she arrived with the particular quality of glance that asked without asking whether she was all right. She gave him the smallest nod, the one that meant yes, actually yes. He gave her the smallest nod back, and that was enough. Between two people who had both learned through difficult years and different kinds of losses, the difference between a grand gesture and a genuine one, that small private exchange was exactly enough. She stayed at the gala for 2 more hours. She spoke to the foundation director again and to 3 other people who wanted to know more about the Whitmore initiative, and to a woman who had read the Rachel Sue article and who said quietly, and in the way of someone admitting something private, "I was in a situation like that. I'm trying to figure out what next looks like." Emma gave her Diane's card. Said, "Call us in January when we're formally operational." Said, "We will have something for you." The woman held the card in both hands. Emma understood that gesture completely. She had once held Alexander Blackwood's card the same way on an October sidewalk outside a hotel, feeling the first faint tremor of something beginning. Now she was on the other side of that. She was the person handing the card. She was the person saying, "We see you. We know what you have. Let us help you make it yours." That was the completion. That was what all of it. The 12 years, the divorce, the 14 months of smallness, the ballroom and the pointing and the room that laughed, the Thursday meeting, and the Hargrove file and the 43 pages, and the Rachel Sue article and the judge who looked again. That was what all of it had been building toward. Not toward Alexander, though he was real and significant, and hers in the way that real things are. Not toward the financial settlement, though it mattered, and she was not going to pretend it didn't. Not toward the public recognition, though it felt correct in a way that private knowledge alone could not. Toward this. The ability to stand in a room completely herself, having lost everything, and rebuilt it from the actual truth of what she was, and hand another woman a card that said, "You are not finished. You are not what they decided you were. You are exactly what you always were, and there is a place for that, and I will help you find it." She drove home to Hoboken that night with Alexander, and they talked about small things, and when she got to her building, he walked her to the door, the way he had begun to do, and she stood in the doorway and felt the December cold and the full warm weight of a life that was entirely, irrevocably, magnificently her own. She was Emma Whitmore. She had been erased from her own story and had rewritten it in permanent ink. She had been pointed at in a ballroom and had become the person people pointed to. She had been called convenient and had proven herself extraordinary. She had taken the wreckage of what someone else had made of her life and had built something from it that would outlast every name Daniel Carter had ever called her. She was not a comeback story. She was not a redemption arc. She was not the triumphant second act in someone else's narrative about what women survive. She was simply completely, finally herself, and that was the one thing nobody had ever been able to take, and nobody ever would again.